left Franklin, Missouri with mules and horses and pack animals, and he arrived in Santa Fe November 16. Yeah, Tuesday. And we're actually going to be celebrating his arrival tomorrow at the plaza at Santa Fe at 10 o'clock if you happen to be around. But it's the opening of the Santa Fe Trail 200 years ago. And I wanted to open with a diary that was written sometime after that. This is David Kellogg. He and his men are going up the river, up to Arkansas. They are at Cow Creek near Pawnee Rock, if you've heard of that. In the silence of the wilderness, with camp made, guards set, the boys gathered around the fires inside the corral. The blue dome above, the flickering lights on the wagon covers and on our bronze faces, the stage is set for oratory, song, and jest. Now and then the boys, they would have some time to have a little fun, and that's what I want to talk to you about. But before I get to that, there was one thing that happened on the trail and all across the country that scared everybody nationwide. It was on this day, November 13. Right now we're in the midst of the Leonid meteor shower. It comes this time of year every year. But in 1833, it was a meteor storm. So instead of 5 or 10 meteors per hour, it was thousands. And so these meteors are streaking from one point across the sky, and people think it's the end of the world. There were people back east that freed their slaves. They're thinking, we've got to get good with God, so we better release our slaves. This is the end. Out here in the west, Bensold Fort on the Arkansas River was just being completed, and there was a Cheyenne camp outside. The people in the fort could hear moaning. The people in the village, the Indian village, are moaning because it's the end of the world. And the warriors are mounted on their horses and they are singing their death songs. Everyone thought this was the end. Meteor storm. This is a banjo that would show up around the end of the Santa Fe Trail. This is a Lion and Healy, made around 1885 in Chicago. Around the same time as that meteor storm, there are people that are going west. They're leaving the settlements. This particular bunch, this song comes from a group that's coming out of Alabama going to Texas. They are leaving their homes, their families, their sweethearts. And the songs have a common thread. I'll leave you here in the land you love, mid-scene so bright and fair, where fragrant flowers are blossoming and music fills the air. I'm going to the west. You say you will not go with me. You turn your eyes away. You say you will not follow me, no matter what I say. I'm going to the west. In this fair land I'll stay no more. Here labor is in vain. I'll leave the mountains of my birth and cross a fertile plain. I'm going to the west. You say you will not go with me. You turn your eyes away. You say you will not follow me, no matter what I say. I'm going to the west. 3 years have passed since first we met, and you became my bride. Now I must journey far away without you by my side. I'm going to the west. I'm going to the west. Going to the west. A little further along, the year is now 1845. There's a merchant whose name was James Josiah Gregg, and he kept a journal. And he had led a party of wagons and mules to Santa Fe and they made a very handsome profit. And so now it's November, and he is thinking it's time to be heading back to the settlements. And he would come to find that perhaps he should have left a little sooner. They were stripped down. They sold off most of the wagons. They just had one wagon left, and it was loaded with corn to take back to the States. He's a true merchant. He's not going to deadhead. He's got things to haul. He also is using that wagon to hide $4,000 worth of gold dust from his profits. They get really bogged down at Wagon Mound, which is north of here, but they get out all right. The real trouble is when they get to the Arkansas River and they find it completely iced over. And so Webb and his companions are out there in the river with axes trying to chop a path for the mules and wagon. Can you imagine how fun that would be? After a while, they have to give up. They can't do it. Now they're stranded. They had a cook named Cassius, and he's thinking, at least what I can do is cook a meal so these men can get their strength back. And so he's preparing a meal on the fire, and he's absent-mindedly singing a song. Webb writes in his journal, it's Home Sweet Home. The contrast of them being out in this miserable conditions, cold and freezing and starving, under constant threat of Indian invasions and dangers such as that, and the comforts of home and being among their family, the contrast was too much. And he declared anyone else that would sing that song or any other song of home or even speak of home they would be fined a gallon of whiskey upon the return to Westport. So let's sing that song. Pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. A charm from the sky seems to hallow us there, which seek through the world is ne'er met with elsewhere. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. Oh, there's no place like home. I gaze on the moon as I tread the drear wilds and feel that my mother now thinks of her child as she looks on that moon from our own cottage door, through the woodbine whose fragrance shall cheer me no more. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. Oh, there's no place like home. Home, sweet home. Well, you can see how Webb might have objected to that song. Oh, that banjo I was just playing, that's called a tack-head banjo. And it doesn't have the brackets and hardware of the modern banjo. I say this is a modern banjo, 1885, right? So it's got just tacks. The skin is applied wet and the tacks secure it, and it doesn't have any frets on it. So it's a typical banjo for 1840. But the year is still 1845, and John Charles Fremont is leading a party out of Westport. It's his third expedition, and he is sent to map the Santa Fe Trail. Now, he has given strict instructions to his men that no one is to keep a journal besides him. He's very particular about that. But one of his men, he created a journal and used the pseudonym Francois de Montaigne. And he kept this journal all through the expedition and was not always complimentary to his commander. But at the beginning of the expedition, he writes that some of the men stayed behind and made a sortie to some of the saloons and taverns in the town and worked themselves up into a state of what he said was gloriousness. And they eventually go wheeling in their wagons into camp, rollicking and singing Lucy Neal and Dan Tucker. Combed his hair with a wagon wheel and died with a toothache in his heel. Get out the way! Get out the way! Get out the way, oh Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper. Get out the way! Get out the way! Get out the way, oh Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper. And oh, good golly, how the ashes flew. Get out the way. Get out the way. Get out the way. Oh, Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper. Get out the way. Get out the way. Get out the way. Oh, Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper. Just have butter, sheep shell up, tongue shell corn, I'll shave you soon as the water gets warm. Get out the way. Get out the way. Get out the way. Oh, Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper. Get out the way. Get out the way. Get out the way. Oh, Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper. To 1854. There are some men that are camped on a creek that is near Rideout. That was Kit Carson's old residence, which is just south of Cimarron. Well, the evening was coming on, and they were very astonished to be greeted by two companies of 1st Dragoons, led by a Colonel Fauntleroy. They were on their way to Fort Union. And so now their party is much larger, and the Army they set up their camp. The following day, they have a regimental band, and the band assembles. Each player is mounted on a black horse, and they are playing brass instruments. And these fellows at the camp are very astonished, but they are treated to a concert. And it's said that the first tunes that they played were Sweet Home, Home Sweet Home, and The Old Folks at Home. Stephen Foster's Old Folks at Home. Can you imagine this band on black horses, brass instruments, playing that tune? Now the year is 1868. And there is an ad in the Santa Fe, New Mexican, 1868, and they are advertising goods, dry goods. Among them are banjos, guitars, violins. They are also offering guitar, violin, banjo strings, and harp strings. They are offering Derringer pistols, Sharps rifles, fine cutlery, and of course, Bowie knives. And you keep in mind, all of this is coming down the trail on wagons. It's also 1868 is when there is a Briggs Banjo Instructor book that shows up in New York City. Yes, New York City. Within that book, it's a book of how to play the banjo in the popular way of the day. And included in that is one tune called the Spanish Fandango. And it's said that that came from New Mexico. So we keep thinking of the Santa Fe Trail as things traveling from the States into Santa Fe. But it didn't take very long that there were merchants from Mexico who were delivering goods to the U.S. and making as good a profit. And there was also an exchange of culture. And so here is one song that makes it from old Mexico into New York City. It's the Spanish Fandango. Spanish Fandango. I'm glad that you came to take this journey down the trail. This being the bicentennial, Mark Lee Gardner and I have been all up and down that trail. I've been all the way to Old Franklin, Boonville, Fort Osage, and it's important to remember these places of growth for our country. I'm going to close with a song that was written by James Grafton Rogers. He was an attorney up in Denver. He was also the mayor of Georgetown. But it was the end of the trail occurred in February of 1880. That's when the railroad arrived in Santa Fe. And it makes the trail obsolete. There were still wagons running, but not nearly like they used to be. Well, it's 30 years later that Rogers appears in the Arkansas River Valley, and he's working with the Native Americans and the Hispanics for their water rights. He is seeing that things are changing. There are old things that are disappearing, and so he was compelled to write about it, and he kept some notes, and he also was inspired to write some poems. And this one poem has become one of the most beloved of the cowboy songs. See, I did get back to the cowboys. This is the Santa Fe Trail. Say, part of you sighted a schooner heading the Santa Fe Trail. They made here Monday or sooner with a water keg roped on the tail, with Daddy and Ma on the mule seat And somewhere around on the way, a tow-headed gal on a pinto, a jingling for old Santa Fe. Yo-ho, a jingling for old Santa Fe. I seen her ride down the Arroyos, way back in the Arkansas sand, with a smile like an acre of sunflowers and a little brown quartz in her hand. She straddled the pinto so airy and rode like she carried the mail, and her eyes near set far to the prairie alongside of the Santa Fe Trail. Yo-ho, on the side of the Santa Fe Trail. I don't know her name and the prairie when it comes to a gal's pretty wide. It's closer from hell to Hilary than it is on the Santa Fe ride. But I guess I'll make cedars by sundown and camping maybe in a swale. I'll come on a gal in a pinto alongside of the Santa Fe Trail. Yo-ho, alongside of the Santa Fe Trail. Santa Fe Trail.
I was surprised with it. That's a huge turnout.
I just wanted to make sure not to go over. So I've been carefully timing that.
I realize it's not a sundial.
Oh, that's, shoot, I didn't even see that. No, that's too far out of my view. Well, I'll tell you about one more thing. It was July 1st, the first stagecoach came to Santa Fe, 1850. And it was the end of the U.S.-Mexican War, and now Santa Fe is U.S. territory. And so now there's regular goods being sent to and fro, but especially there is mail that is being sent back and forth. And so that is very carefully maintained, and regular routes are being run. And eventually there are mail wagons, but then the stagecoaches arrive, 1850. And about that same time, there's a song that turns up. It's called the California Stage Company. Respect for youth or age aboard the California stage. The riders push and haul for seats as bedbugs do upon the sheets. Big. Compelled to sit with dresses in tobacco spit. The gentlemen don't seem to care, but talk of politics and swear. The California Stage Company.